Well, hi guys. We're still working on Chapter 11, Part 1, so this is our second video, and we're going to talk about the hierarchy of the nervous system. We're going to talk about it from a cellular level and move all the way up to gross anatomy. Uh, so just think we're going to move from little to big as we go through this video. So to begin, we want to talk about the cells that make up the nervous system, and there are two primary cells or cell types. One are glial cells and two are neurons. So if you look at this picture here, this picture here in yellow, that's a neuron. And then these little guys attached to that neuron are glial cells. And glial cells, these support cells, are really the unsung heroes in this play. Or what, if you want to think about, the neuron being this famous actor, and then all of these glial cells doing all of the hard work behind the scenes. Okay, so the neuron gets all the fame and the glial cells do all of the work. So they bring nutrients to the neurons in general. There's 5 different glial cells that we'll get to learn about in the next video. However, in general, so those 5 different glial cells have different jobs, but in general, they bring nutrients to the neurons. They perform phagocytosis, which is engulfing foreign debris, whether that be a bacteria or some sort of waste in the cerebrospinal fluid or around the neural tissue. So they actually engulf it. They eat it, which is really cool. They actually enclose it within its cytoplasm. It's wild. So if you get really excited, you should about phagocytosis, Google it, and there's probably a really cool little video on how it works. It's wild. It's just cool. And then they also form myelin, which is this fatty sheath. So if you look at these blue cells, you'll see how they have long projections that wrap around the axon of the neuron. So here, this is the body of the neuron. Here are the dendrites, and then here's the axon. And the axon has this fatty sheath we call myelin. It's made out of cholesterol, and it helps improve the conduction velocity of that action potential, which is the signal essentially that's sent from the cell body that's sent through this axon as it travels through. So we have this insulation per se that helps send that information faster. So it helps improve the conduction velocity. Okay, so it allows the information to get from here to here much quicker. Okay, and then we have our neuron, which we just talked about. So this is this guy here. So there's 2 primary cell types. Okay, now we're going to move up from the cellular level and talk a little bit about how the nervous system works. So the first line in terms of the nervous system working is just reflexes, subconscious responses to environmental stimuli. And so if you look here at the bottom, this is, you guys may have seen this on a video or even had a doctor do it, where they take a speculum and they hit your patella tendon right here, and it forces your foot up. So that's a reflex, and this is a picture of how that arc works, which is really cool. So this is the posterior aspect of the spinal cord. This is anterior. So this is the dorsal root here. And I'll just warm you guys up for the spinal cord anatomy. So, and this here is a horizontal view. So we've just cut the spinal cord horizontally. So So when that essentially that Golgi tendon organ and those muscle spindles are stretched. So there's that picture there. Actually, this is a picture of the muscle spindle. So it stretches. The Golgi tendon organ then communicates with this muscle spindle, and it stretches, and then it sends that information up through the dorsal root into the spinal cord, and it doesn't even have to travel up to the brain. It can just hit at the same level in the spinal cord and then travel out the ventral root of the spinal cord back to the muscle. So it's just cool. So that means anything that doesn't get up to the cerebrum is subconscious. You're unaware of it. So this all happens at the level of the spinal cord, which is really, really neat. So another example of a reflex like that is if you touch a hot plate or the hot oven, and you move your body away before you realize it's even hot. And that's a reflex. So it's really cool stuff. All right, so now we're gonna we're going to talk about ganglia and nuclei. So ganglia and nuclei are both aggregations of neural cell bodies. And you're saying, well, what does that mean? So neural cell bodies are these guys here. Okay. So just think of a group of these cell bodies all hanging out together. Okay. And so ganglia and nuclei are the same thing. They're just located in different places in the body. So so just think they're just those groups of neural cell bodies all hanging out together. And if you find those neural cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system outside the brain and spinal cord, they're ganglia. If you find them inside the brain and spinal cord in the central nervous system, CNS, then they're nuclei. So I think of a gang out perusing the streets in the middle of the night. So they're out of their homes and they're out in the periphery. Whereas so they're the gang. So that's how I remember peripheral nervous system and ganglia. Or if you're familiar with the anatomy of a cell, the nuclei is the very center of the cell. So I think the nucleus is in the most proximal part of the body, which is the brain and spinal cord. So that might be another way to remember where you're going to find ganglia and where you're going to find nuclei. But just remember, they're the same thing, just found in different places of the body, and they're both aggregations of those neural cell bodies. All right. So now that we've talked about the neural cell body, which is this guy here, let's talk about the axons. Okay. So just like ganglia and nuclei are essentially the same thing, just found either in the PNS or the CNS, and that's what PNS is peripheral nervous system, CNS is central nervous system. Nerves and tracts are the same thing. However, they're aggregations of axons that work together to send similar information. Okay? So let's see. So just think of a bunch of axons traveling together, bundled together. Okay? So nerves are in the peripheral nervous system, and I just remember we know about nerves in just our general terminology. For the most part, everybody knows what a nerve is. So just think of that, just categorize that as being in your peripheral nervous system. And the stuff we don't talk about are the tracts. And tracts are those aggregations of axons, all sending similar information. And think of those as being in your brain and your spinal cord. Okay, although they're the same thing as a nerve, they're just located in your CNS. All right, so now we're going to move away from tracts and nerves, and we're going to move and talk to you a little bit about structures of the brainstem. So that's the next, in terms of a hierarchy, that's the next step up. So we have a series of nuclei and tracts. So remember, the brainstem is part of that central nervous system. And so you'll see we have nuclei rather than, and go ahead and fill in the blank there, nuclei rather than ganglia. We have tracts rather than nerves because it's the central nervous system. And they mediate the higher level reflexes and some cortical commands. Okay, and so the cortical commands are commands from the cortex, so kind of more conscious control. Okay, and then higher level reflexes like breathing, heart rate, response to stressors, things like that. All right, then we're going to talk about the diencephalon, our old friend, the diencephalon. And again, that's a grouping of nuclei and neural tracts, and that mediates sensory information. Remember, the diencephalon has the thalamus, and the thalamus is that grand central station in terms of sending sensory information where it needs to go. So that's what it means by mediate, right? It mediates sensory information arriving at the cerebrum and helps provide autonomic responses. And if you remember back, we have the epithalamus and the hypothalamus, and both of them are in charge of some of those autonomic responses. So the hypothalamus, for example, plays a large role in the endocrine system and responding to external stimuli in terms of temperature control and metabolism, which is all related to that endocrine system. So, so a really cool little structure. So here's our diencephalon. All right, now we get to move to the cerebellum and the cerebrum. So here's a mid-sagittal view of the brain. Here, this is anterior This is posterior. This is our cerebrum. You can think of it as the telencephalon. You can think of it as actually is the telencephalon. And then here's our cerebellum. Okay, so let's talk about the cerebellum first because that's lower on the hierarchy. It's groupings of nuclei, which are those neural cell bodies, and then specialized neurons and tracts that integrate information from the body, integrate somatic sensory information from the body, and special sensory information. And remember, that's taste, touch, sight, smell, and hearing. Okay, with motor planning, right, which is the ability to move, okay, and command coordinated movement. So the ability to ambulate, which is walk, fluidly, be able to dance, remember motor patterns like shooting a basketball or swimming. All right, and then we get to talk about our friend, the cerebrum. So the cerebrum is the last rung in terms of a hierarchy. So it's this guy here, the telencephalon, and it's essentially where we interpret the world at a conscious level. Okay, and we're gonna spend a lot more time on that in just a little bit. All right, you guys. Then we're gonna move on to the next video.